Good morning to those of you who have clicked on so far. I can see our participant numbers ticking up, so we'll just give everyone a chance to join before we kick off. There's a whilst you're doing that, if you'd like to introduce yourself, use the chat function to say hello, say where you're from. Then that'd be great. You could tell us what the weather's like where you are, if you like. Get a bit of a weather forecast around the country or wherever in the world you are, of course, in this virtual world. It doesn't, I guess, it could be all sorts of places. Yeah, let us know who's there. I can open up my chat. I think you've got coming in through, in this sort of brave new world, we're coming in through two platforms. Some of you will be coming in through Zoom, and some of you through the Hoover, or I'm not quite sure how we're supposed to pronounce it, platform, which we've used for today for this event, to try and kind of create a little bit more of a kind of traditional of the sort of conference feel that you get when we can actually have people live in a place, which I know seems like an extraordinary idea now. Yeah, use your chat function to say hello whilst we just wait for give people a minute or two to sign up. The Isle of Wight strongly represented today. Expect interruptions, apparently. I think a lot of us are in that world. If I suddenly have to disappear to the front door to pick up the latest package, then apologise for that, or it's usually my dog barking in the background, of course. Got Nick from New York, apparently. Okay, so Nick, you're winning the prize for furthest away at the moment. And we have about close by to me, you've got sunny Bath. People's Republic of Totnes is well represented today. That's Devon, for those of you who don't know your Southwest geography. I imagine quite a lot of you have been down that part of the world a few times. Up in Yorkshire and Harrogate, got Bristol represented. Excellent. And about, we got Meg, who's stuck in Sheffield, is normally in Orkney. I'm not quite, I don't know, Orkney would be a very beautiful place to be, I imagine, at the moment, but presumably pretty cold and wild. Okay, we've got about half of you coming in through Zoom and half of you coming in through the Hoover platform. So I think we're on about a good 250 of you so far. So welcome everyone. I think given that, I think we shall make a start. Just move my chat function over here. There we go. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this electricity storage network event. This is the first session in the ESN's kind of annual marketplace, we're calling it this today. So the annual conference. I think most of you probably know the Electricity Storage Network, which is managed by Regen, and hence I'm here chairing this session at Merlin Hyman, Chief Exec of Regen, for those of you who don't know me. But the Electricity Storage Network, of those of you who don't know, is the kind of voice of storage in the UK market. And you know, it's great to kind of get you all to get together today. And as I was explaining at the beginning, we're using the kind of Hoover platform today, which should give you lots of opportunities to interact, to introduce yourselves to each other, to try and network, book meetings with each other, and try and hopefully stimulate lots of great new contacts and business over the coming days. And indeed, just after this, there's a lunchtime networking session. I'm afraid you have to provide your own lunch in today's world, but we can provide at least a networking facility. So if you want to interact, you carry on putting in comments and thoughts within the chat function in Hoover or through the Zoom platform as well. And one of the things actually I've noticed in these online conferences is that sometimes there's a sort of parallel conference alongside the speakers going along in the chat room, with lots of you introducing yourselves and highlighting interesting reports or opportunities, and even starting to do some business together. So that's actually one of the, you don't have to sit quite silently in your chair watching as you used to in the past. You can kind of have the interaction as well. So do get stuck into that, and I'm sure our delegates will be interested to see what you're chatting about as well. I can see we've got, just in terms of the furthest away, I think New York's still winning. We do have Victor from Seville here, so welcome. I was going to say it must be a bit warmer and nicer there, but I think it's been pretty cold in Spain recently, isn't it? So maybe not. Anyway, let us start then by introducing our panel, and then this is billed as our leaders debate. So to kick off the conference with a discussion about kind of where we are, where is storage at, and we've got three eminently qualified people to join us. So we've got Kathy, who's from Semcor, Trading and Optimization Director there, and of course previously Head of Markets at the Electricity System Operator. I'll bring them in a minute, but just a quick kind of introduction. We've got Marek, who is MD for UK, Ireland, and interestingly now Israel. So I think we might come back to that, the interesting kind of remit you've got yourself there Marek. Israel in the news quite a lot at the moment. And David from Intergen. Intergen, I think, have been in the news quite a lot from over the last year or so because of bringing forward and getting planning permission indeed for some very large battery projects. So fascinating to hear from David. So that's our panel. And the context for this debate is when Regen did its, when Regen kind of started working on batteries and electricity storage and that within the overall kind of flexibility system operation world, when we published our first paper, I think it was called Towards a Commercial Model. And there really was, we had traditional pumped storage on the network, but really very little in the way of batteries or any other types of technology providing storage, but a lot of kind of interest in the market. And we had an analogy, some of you may remember, of an unsolved Rubik's Cube, of the kind of the technology, regulatory environment and the markets, and that it was pretty scrambled at that time, the Rubik's Cube. So we'll explore a little bit today if it's someone's managed to solve some of those some aspects, some faces at least, of the Rubik's Cube. So there's very little there. We just did our most recent analysis, so we look at the registers that are now available for what's connected to the network, and we came up with 1,103 megawatts of battery storage connected to our networks now. So we're past the gigawatt milestone, and we've done that in pretty short order. So that's a really, I think, an interesting milestone to see what's happened in the last few years. And of course, where are we going? Because if you look at projections going forward, if you look at some of the modelling done for the Energy White Paper, if you look at the Committee on Climate Change, you look at National Grid Affairs, you look at anyone's projections, and you're going to get that 1 gig is really just the start. So we're going to need a lot more flexibility, and we're going to need a lot more storage as part of that of various different types. So what have we learned from getting to that first gigawatt, and what's the future looking like? That's really the kind of nub of what I'd like to explore with our panelists today. Okay, so let's now come to our panel, and let's start with Kathy, I think. And Kathy, if you can give us a kind of just thought of what, from your perspective, and you've obviously been a gamekeeper turned poacher. Is that the right term? Probably poacher, gamekeeper, then poacher again. Several other things in between. What have we learned from the last few years and what are the kind of market, what do we need to take from that, and the kind of market structures we'll need if we're going to incentivize the scale of investment that we're going to need to deliver what we will need by 2030.
Hi everyone, as Merlin said, my name is Kathy McClay and I'm the Director of Trading and Optimization at Semcor. I've been there for about a year or so, and I'm interested in storage because we've got a fleet of about 700, coming up on 800 megawatts of flexible assets. That includes 60 megawatts of batteries and another 60 megawatts on the way, which have been supplied by Fluence, by Marek, who's on the panel today. But my sort of background in storage goes way back to 1999. I cut my teeth at First Hydro, so I spent 5 years on pump storage. And then, as Merlin said, I spent 4 years opening up the markets at National Grid to smaller players and to storage, things like batteries, etc., on the ancillary service. And I think storage is incredibly important for the decarbonisation of the system. All of the reports say that, and you can just see recently with what's been going on in the system, we need a lot of flexibility because the uncertainty of renewables is quite high. What's interesting at the minute is batteries actually, everyone said batteries and things like storage would fill in where renewables aren't running. That's not really what they're used for at the minute. If you look at it, pretty much everyone is providing ancillary services to National Grid. And that's really because of the duration of the storage at the minute and the speed of it. So for instance, in my 60 megawatts of batteries, it's all providing dynamic containment right now because that's the best service. When prices were very tight recently, we did swap it out on a couple of occasions and ran over the peak. But to be honest, you need a spread of over £450 a megawatt hour if you're only going to run for 1 hour to beat the dynamic containment price. So I think batteries are doing very well at the minute, and there is growth in ancillary services. If you look at dynamic containment, we've got less than 350 megawatts in there at the minute. Grid are trying to buy 500 megawatts right now, and they're going to increase that to 1,000. But we will reach the point where, like we did with FFR, when I first was at Grid, we were at 15 quid and we managed to get it to collapse to 4, which you might think is great for consumers, and it is good, but we get that cyclical nature. So the key thing is understanding what products you can go into in batteries, and also looking at the duration, because if you start wanting to move into more reserve products, an hour isn't great. So looking at longer term storage is going to be very important. And I'm not convinced the only way is batteries as well. As I'm very involved in the operability project in Scotland of Pathfinders, looking at things like fault current, looking at things like reactive, etc. So I'm interested in other forms of storage, such as still pump storage, cryogenic storage, gas storage. The question then becomes, how do you bring that on the system? Because the fixed costs are very high of that. And if you look at some of the competitors to that, we bring on interconnectors. They're seen as providing flexibility to our system, but they get a cap and floor regime because their costs are quite high. And one thing I think we need to look at is, do we need to encourage other large forms of storage that can provide other services? What can we do with batteries to make them do more than they do now? How can we get them longer? How can we get them providing fault current, reactive, looking at virtual synchronous machines? So I think it's a very exciting time, but I don't think the market can do everything on its own, perhaps. And that's from me, who's a big, big proponent of markets, as you know, Merlin.
Okay, it's a fascinating, and to hear the kind of way it's actually working and spread. What would surprise you from those early days when you were involved in the early days of EFR and Grid, and you were setting up some of these markets, and you were thinking about, you know, the role of an ESO in the future and these strange new technologies that are kind of people are starting to merge. What do you think? Have we gone faster than you expected? Are we doing different things than we expected? Did Grid get anything horribly wrong that you want to hold up your hand for now?
Well, the interesting thing is, so the EFR project had actually kicked off before I joined. It was Duncan started that, Duncan Burt, but I was the head of commercial when we signed the contracts. Now, what was interesting, when I was talking to all those battery providers, they said, Kathy, we cannot bring a battery onto the system unless we get a long-term contract. Unless we get a 4 or 5 year contract, it just won't come on the system. So as you know, you probably know that EFR was oversubscribed, and we actually got a lower price than FFR at the time for that tender. But what was interesting was that in the next round of FFR, when we were still doing longer term contracts, 1 year contracts, I had batteries bidding in for 1 year contracts. So either they'd actually already committed thinking they would win EFR, or they just realized actually the prices are better than we thought. But that was interesting for me. The growth has been interesting. But there was a lot of money sloshing around, wasn't there, as well? Because we lost the solar subsidy, so people were investing in other things. But what I would say is, to own and run a battery well, it's not a passive activity. You have to really think about it. We're unusual, I guess, in the battery owners. We own and operate. There's a few of us doing that. And we operate as part of a bigger portfolio, but we're constantly sitting, looking at all the markets and switching, and it's that switching that's really important. Okay. But the fact that someone on the panel is going to build a gig battery, I'm going, wow, that's interesting. And one of my questions to him is, why 1 gig all in the same place rather than dotted around the country? Because I'm a distributed person.
Okay, I think I perhaps retire my role as chair and let Kathy take over, but probably happen whether I choose to or not. Anyway, David, so that's a great tee up. You know, what you're coming into the market, you're looking at putting in huge investment. It'd be great to have a bit of a kind of catch up, David, on your where you're at in your development. But also, you know, what are you learning from what you're seeing out in the market, and what kind of structure, you know, how is it all great if we got everything in place and investment like yours is just going to flow, or is there more that we're going to need to do if we're going to bring forward the volume of storage we need?
Yes, hi, good morning everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly enough. We had a few sound issues earlier on, so I'll try and speak lively enough, and I hope my Scottish tones don't get in the way of the conversation as well. So yeah, actually, before I start addressing some of that, let me quickly introduce myself. David Murray. I work in growth and strategy at Intragen. We develop, build and operate power stations. We've got that build and operate model that Kathy touched on, and we've been doing so in the UK for around about 25 years or so. And obviously, we've seen a lot of changes and evolutions in the market over that time. And I think, just by way of background, obviously we're one of the larger IPPs in the UK, headquartered in Edinburgh, and probably supply roughly 5% of the UK's needs. We've got about 150 employees here, including our own trading and commercial team and O&M staff. And I think actually, you know, that in itself is one of the reasons that we've got more comfort in moving into this market. You know, we're coming in as a knowledgeable participant already, albeit not directly with batteries. We've done a lot of learning in that specific field. But what we do have is the development experience and the understanding of merchant markets. And I'm sure we'll come on and talk about merchant models, you know, contrast to the dynamic containment or frequency response type models. But we're coming in with that knowledge and that understanding, and I guess that confidence overall that it is sustainable for the longer term. In terms of what we've got on the ground already, we've got about 2.8 gigawatts of stations dotted across the country, majority of which is 3 CCGTs, each around about 800 megawatts at Corriton in Essex, Brook Savage in Cheshire, Spalding in Lincolnshire. And also, I think importantly for us strategically, we've got an OCGT adjacent to our Spalding CCGT station, which we completed in 2019. And that, I think it's fair to say, was the first kind of large-scale new thermal plant to secure an award in the capacity market and be project financed off the back of that. So as you can see, we've been kind of focused purely on gas up until now. But for us, the move to batteries, it's not. These projects have been in the books for some time. Now, obviously, there was a flurry of activity around the EFR project, and we've seen robust, projects since then in that ancillary services space. But in our view, the market is looking right now for that next evolution. That evolution being a more energy arbitrage type model, and we've got ambitions to build at scale. And we've got talk about the Gateway project, which recently got its planning consent and now has all of its consents in place, along synergistic benefits, if you like, of being located next to an existing station. We've got another one, much the same at Spalding, similarly quite large scale. It's currently 165 megawatts. Calls to increase that planning consent there. So we hope we've got a bit of a pipeline developing, and in the case of Gateway, you'll see that's already pre-qualified for the capacity market in the forthcoming auction. So, I mean, the one thing I would say, there's kind of few homework questions, which I did a quick look at before joining the call. We're not experts in forecasting the future generation mix, but if you do go to the experts, and obviously you won't be surprised to hear that we do that a lot, you get a range of answers. But I think they all, as Kathy touched on too, they all show there is going to be a role for storage systems going forward. My view is that we could easily get pushing towards high single-digit gigawatts on the system by the end of this decade. And I think that'll be a combination of small and large, transmission and distribution. And I think probably more than just lithium ion. Again, Kathy touched on the duration topic, which we may well pick up on later, but it may be there are other technical solutions out there which better address some of the longer duration needs for storage, and by that I mean week to week or season to season.
David, thank you. And you started to bring up some of the key topics I think we want to explore there in terms of the kind of the revenue streams and how those might develop and change, the types of technology, and how that might evolve as well. I think we can. The sound is okay. It comes and goes a little bit, but I think we're pretty much getting the main gist. So let's go to Marek then, because Marek, you're sitting here's two of your biggest customers, I believe, in the market. You're making the kit, and you're kind of interacting with a lot of people in this market, and of course in other markets. So you have a kind of fairly unique perspective of how that market's developing, how the kind of confidence in that, and what's driving investment decisions, and like so. What's your feeling? The gigawatt. We'll celebrate the first that milestone, and I don't know how much of that is Fluence technology. Maybe you'll be pleased to tell us. What have we learned for you, and what's that telling us about the kind of market structures we need going forward?
Sure. Yeah, so before I launch into that, just to reintroduce myself and Fluence, I guess many on the various platforms that you're joining with will maybe already know me, already know Fluence. I'm here every year, pretty much. So I'm managing director for UK, Ireland, and Israel, which interesting territory, as you said, Merlin. We'll maybe get into a little bit of that later as some of these discussions evolve. And Fluence, as you said, as energy storage technology provider. So we provide hardware and software all around the world for basically battery-based energy storage applications. So we've seen a lot of different markets open around the world. We've done about 6 gigawatt hours of battery-based energy storage projects now. So that's projects either operational or in construction at the moment. So a very, very large number. Yeah, we've been here since the beginning of the UK market, so I can maybe talk first about what has, what we're doing well, I think, in the UK, and then what still needs to be done, or what lessons we can draw from other markets. So when we started, and I've been involved in this space now about a decade, but really the sort of first landmark project, or obviously I would say this because it was a Fluence one, for the UK market was a Kilroot Power Station back in 2015. So there were a couple of other small battery projects around that time as well. Leighton Buzzard, probably known to those that follow the industry for a while, but it was a government subsidized sort of research project, whereas the Kilroot project was the first commercial investment by what was then AES Kilroot Power and is now EP Investments UK. And unsurprisingly, that was a frequency regulation based application. And Kathy's already given a good sort of overview of the history of that. We've talked about EFR, that, you know, pretty shortly after that project in 2015, there was this gaining confidence that batteries were good for that sort of, you know, system service application. And I use the word system service quite deliberately, because ancillary service is the language of the past, I would say. These system services are no longer ancillary, they're no longer to the side, they're the core of the energy system and how it's put together. And I guess one of the first things to observe that has been going well, but it's sort of, you know, work in progress still, is equitable access to markets. So first of all, when I was working on that Kilroot project, the biggest challenge was actually getting paid to do the same thing that a thermal plant could do. You didn't fit the rule book, you didn't tick all the boxes of what a generator was, because batteries aren't generators. So we're starting to see this, you know, already with you know, the frequency response markets and how they've evolved. But National Grid ESO, I would say one thing they are doing well is looking at these new revenue streams, these new services, and opening up markets for, so the pathfinders Kathy mentioned as well, for voltage, reactive power, short circuit level. These are all things that batteries can do as well, if they're given an opportunity to compete. So that's the first thing you need to do to open a market. Second is, and again, I think, you know, work in progress, but good work in progress so far, is paying for performance. And by that, I mean, we've seen EFR, we've seen dynamic containment. They have been designed based on grid needs, jobs to be done in air commas perspective, as opposed to what can a thermal plant do, and let's procure that. Because that's what creates differentiated performance and opportunities for more flexible technologies, which provide more value to earn more money and therefore, you know, get more on the bars quicker. And then the final point about what has been done well is, I guess, the question of scale. So we've seen, largely through the efforts of ESN and Regen, lobbying BEIS to remove some of the obstacles that existed in the past around planning thresholds. You know, there was every project was being built was 50 megawatts or under, because the planning threshold for local planning was 50 megawatts. Now we've had that removed. Well, David talked about it, you know, with the Gateway project. You know, we're seeing significantly larger projects built to service some of these needs. When you look at the large versus small, I'm sure we'll get into that discussion a bit more. I think both is the answer. We're seeing increasingly fleet buyers like Semcorp on the one side, you know, spreading assets that are still reasonable size, but around strategic locations in the country. And we're also seeing these very big mega or giga projects, if you want to call them that way. They each serve a purpose, and there's pros and cons to each, which maybe we'll get into. So maybe I'll pause there, because that's what we're doing well. I can talk about what next or what to do better, but I don't want to you know.
That's very helpful, Marek. Just give us a little bit of a sense of the kind of world of, you know, someone selling batteries at the moment, and the kind of your day, you know, the biggest challenges you're having, the kind of conversations that you're having. You know, have you got a lot of people coming to you for quotes all the time? Is there a lot of kind of speculation in the market? Are you just focusing on, you know, your key 2 or 3 key customers, and you know, and is that changing? Just to kind of here and now, what, you know, how does it feel to be it's the biggest battery seller in the country?
Yeah, it is extreme. I think if I could describe it in a word, it's oversubscribed. So there's immense interest, and so we're bombarded with RFIs, RFPs, RFQs, tenders, bilateral offers, all of these things coming in, and so there's a lot of activity going on in the market. And I'm speaking across 3 regions here now: UK, Ireland, and Israel. Each is quite different and distinct, but there's a real, you know, sense this market, I think, is growing despite some of the challenges which, you know, we may talk about. One of the issues that we see in the UK market, GB market, maybe I should specify, compared to the Irish all-island system, because of the merchant nature of these projects, the projects there's still ways, to get them to move ahead, but there are specific, triggers that you have to look at and specific things to get investors on board, depending on the kind of those investors.
Okay.
If you look at the other extreme, and Israel is now a good moment to bring this in. Like, Israel was not on anyone's radar, I think, for a long time. In 2 years, it is projected by most of the major analysts in the storage space to be the largest market in Europe, in EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, overtaking all of the work of the UK and Ireland, which are currently the biggest markets, in the past 5 years. Why is that? Two very specific things. So one, they set explicit storage targets, 8 gigawatt hours they want online within a very short period of time. And second is that they've offered long-term contracts, so 23 to 25-year PPAs of solar and storage. So those two things, much as we can talk about benefits and cons of long-term contracts versus not, have been very, very successful, because this number I'm talking about for 2023 is already contracted. It's been awarded. It will be built. It's not a speculative thing. So maybe that's the sort of, in terms of what could you do differently or next, things that have very clearly been successful.
And just one other question in terms of setting context is, the price. I won't ask what price you're charging Kathy or David, but or give me a kind of a quote. But just there's been a lot of talk about the costs falling and figures per megawatt hour, and what broadly, what's the trajectory been over the last few years, and are we still heading down?
Yes, so we are, and that's why I think lithium ion still has a lot of runway. Maybe I should again say, for completeness, we're a technology agnostic provider. Now, really, we're electrochemically agnostic, where the building block that we have can accommodate different battery suppliers, different chemistries, and essentially we assemble these blocks in different ways depending on the projects. But at the same time, it's really lithium ion where we're seeing these significant cost increases. So last 10 years, it's often brought out, 90% fall in battery costs, a tripling of energy density. So you can do it for a tenth of the cost and a third of the footprint that you could. In the next 10 years, it's projected there's another 50% decline in the battery costs and another multiple improvement on the density. So those trends, that it's not as steep as it was over the last decade, but it's still pretty steep. And as a result of that, coming to the duration point that Kathy raised, we're seeing already in other markets where the structures reward it. Israel is one, 4-hour duration batteries, and in the US, a lot of the projects we're doing is 5 or 6 hours even. So batteries are already competitive in that market if there's a reward for doing so. And as the costs fall, 7 hours, 8 hours is possible. They will never be weekly or seasonal storage. So as we look towards net zero, you're always going to need other technology classes, intersector coupling, that kind of thing, to get to 100%. But for when we say long duration, again, I'll use the air quotes because it's thrown around a lot. Batteries are long duration storage in the daily context, right? If you're looking at diurnal shifting.
Okay, excellent. So we've got to a gigawatt, and we have an energy white paper that sets out a goal of the UK building an electricity system that's based on wind and solar. I think explicitly says that. I think it talks about 65% by 2030 as a, I think it said, when is a target, not a target. It said, this isn't a target, but we're sort of putting it out there anyway. So perhaps the next key milestone is ESO has set a target to be able to run a net zero system in the UK by 2025. Good example of leadership. So, Kathy, coming back to yourself there, what does that tell us? What are the markets and the value streams that are that ESO and perhaps other parties will be needing to create to make that a reality? And what does that say about the kind of the market, the revenues for batteries, and possibly those revenues where batteries won't be able to provide solutions?
So first of all, I think it's important to define what grids mean by a net zero, being able to manage a zero emissions system by 2025. Well, at least when I was there, what they mean by that is that right now, in order to get enough inertia and stuff in the system, sometimes you have to take off renewables and bring on other plants, and you're actually increasing the carbon content of the system. So when they've been talking about the 2025 in the past, it wasn't that none of the balancing actions would have carbon in them, which is the target by 2050 for the country. In fact, we'll need to be negative. It was that no carbon-free generation would be displaced to be able to balance the system. So in 2025, it just means that you'll still have gas engines, you'll still have pump storage, etc., coming online to balance it. As we go forward, you then have to start thinking about, well, so for me, gas is a transition fuel, and I see gas engines like some of the ones we have in our portfolio being online 2030, perhaps 2035, as we transition. But the question is what you replace them with. You probably need longer term storage for that than now. Someone's asked the question online, will the capacity market help with that? There are actually different derating factors for the capacity market depending on your duration right now, and that's some analysis that was done. It's done every year, and it's one of my old teams that do that, because I was surprised that in the modelling, if there is a capacity market event, the average duration of an event is 4 hours. And if you think about it, that's because of the kind of plant we have on the system right now, which takes 4 hours to come on. Once we have a different mix, the whole idea of what capacity is, what system security is going to change. In terms of how we encourage it, I'm not really sure. And I want to ask Marek that, because at the minute, if you look at it, because the prices tend to spike up for fairly short periods, you tend to go for getting all the capacity out as quickly as possible, capturing the spike, and then going and then charging at some point. And one of the problems is that, you know, the amount of thermal cycling that you can have on a day. You know, I've seen demonstrations where people are cycling 6 times. You're going to kill your battery after a while. So think about your long-term service agreement, etc. Think about how you use it. So better software, better understanding. And I think price shape and how the price shape evolves as the CCGTs come off, as the renewables get higher and higher, that will bring on different durations of batteries as well, I think, because you'll see longer durations with these kinds of prices.
So we're still talking, thanks Kathy, so and pass that back to Marek, but we are still talking about you know, batteries here, and then the potential market kind of engagement in the wholesale market and price arbitrage driving some longer duration storage. And it's interesting just to hear, Kathy, about how, you know, your actual experience right now of operating in the market, and what you know, yeah, what you're, you know, so
I'll explain one of the frustrations right now. Batteries can do more than provide energy. Out of the inverters, you can manage reactive power as well. And it was really interesting because we tried to take part in the Merseyside tender for reactive power, but we're connected to a DNO network, not to the transmission network. And the DNO, well, you'll probably guess which one it was. I won't mention any names, but it was Merseyside. They actually just said, so they approached us and said, would you like to be part of our aggregated solution? We kind of went, well, how does that work? You're a DNO. You're supposed to provide access to markets. You're not supposed to be taking part in them in that way. But in the end, we couldn't take part because they just said, the DNO just said, we don't know what effect you providing reactive power would have on our network. We don't have time to do the study. No, thank you very much. And if you look at the battery that did win up there, it was TO connected. So one of the things is still there's blockers around being on the distribution system, and the whole system thinking, which is something we're all trying to push, is really important. So if David's connected at the TO level, that'll be really interesting. The other thing is that whatever you buy your battery thinking you're going to do something different with it, is the other thing I'd say. So the batteries we've got, it was actually UK Power Reserve before Semcor bought them. They thought they'd do some arbitrage, they do some FFR. We're now using them for dynamic containment. I would really like to investigate at some point, looking at the inverter design. Could I use reactive power? Could I create a virtual synchronous machine using my new battery that's coming online that's 50 megawatts using a grid forming converter? But for that, so my advice as well, you need a really strong relationship with your battery provider. They need to be willing to work with you to develop new solutions and understand that this will benefit them in the long run as well. So having a really strong relationship makes it's advantageous for you and the battery provider as well, because they're learning from your project as well.
Okay, just there was some points coming back to Marek then. I'll come back to David about the kind of, we're starting to get into the kind of what can batteries provide, what sort of flexibility do you need, and David pointed out that you ask two experts about what the market will look like in 10 years and you'll get 10 responses. So that you're going to have to be able to flex and to manage. What's that? Does that reflect your view, Marek, and how the market's developing?
Yeah, so, well, there's two pieces, I think. So one quick answer on what Kathy talked about with thermal management and so on. So one of the things that naturally gravitates to, the reason actually we're seeing now probably most commonly 2-hour duration systems as opposed to 1 hour, partly is that diversification of revenue streams, but it's also as you go to a longer duration, it's a lower C rate system, a lower current rate. And that basically means it heats up less quickly. The inertia of the system in terms of heating up and cooling down is lower. So as you move towards 2 hour, 4 hour, etc., that actually makes flexing the assets harder, more readily capable, and they degrade less over time. So we're starting to see that already precisely because of the diversifications of use cases. In terms of where the market is going, I mean, yeah, each of these applications, so we've been very closely looking at all the different Pathfinder projects, constraint, stability, voltage, and each case, it requires the definition to be very clearly pinned down by ESO before you can confirm you can do it or not. But in each case, we've been able to say, yes, we can. But the issue, for instance, if you take Stability Pathfinder, although a battery can provide you this, a short circuit level contribution and inertia, it's not going to be the whole business case. You're competing against other technologies like synchronous condensers. So you have to be able to stack that on top of other revenue streams and other capabilities. And the more complex you make this, the more things that we as a technology provider have to go off, to try and, we have a technology roadmap, right? These things don't just magically work. You have to invest time, money, effort to develop each capability and each feature. So it takes time to do that. So whilst the diversification of all these opportunities is great, it's difficult to try and tackle them all at once. I don't know if that sort of addresses what you were after.
Yeah. Okay, let's make sure our audience is awake and engaged, which I can see they are from the chat and the questions, and people are going to pick up on those. But let's try a poll as well and ask a nice simplistic question about the amount of capacity of the battery capacity we expect on the system by 2030. I'm hoping Hannah's going to be able to bring that up. So it's a fairly straightforward question. Obviously, this is greatly simplifying things. We're talking about gigawatts, not gigawatt hours, but for the purposes of the limited polling capacity on Zoom and a quick answer, then I'm going to invite you all to have your best guess. We should say on the Hoover platform, for those of you coming in through that, I think you answered the question as you signed in. And you can have a look on that if you're on that, but I'm getting...
Merlin, can I just ask, on the question it said storage and you said batteries.
That's an interesting question. I meant storage. I meant electricity storage. So
that changes my answer.
Your 2.5 gigawatts of or whatever it is, or 3 of pumped hydro, you can have that. So less than 5 would essentially be saying not a lot more, a bit, another gig or something. Okay, I think you're all pretty good at Zoom these days, so I should imagine we get the responses pretty quickly. And so we've got 42% at 5 to 10 and 38% at 10 to 20. That's pretty much exactly what we've got on the Hoover poll as well, which is about another 100 people who had answered that one. So that's the kind of that's what the world out there is seeing. If you trust the wisdom of the crowds for your investment decisions. David, so in that context, and as someone developing big projects at the moment, I mean, you've talked about the kind of markets that you're focusing. I'd be interested in what's the biggest challenge for yourself as you try, actually get these projects away and build.
I guess our projects are larger scale, as you pointed out. The reason that we're going for that scale is because the overall commercial package works for it. In terms of the challenge, I guess the market is evolving all the time, and that goes to not just equity, but obviously the debt market as well. So it's ensuring that I think the story is fairly clear, but it's a question of ensuring that you can communicate that and get confidence. And much as it was the case with the early merchant projects, whether they're gas or whatever, you need to ensure that the story is robust and backed up by adequate forecasting of revenues and such like. But I think broadly, what we've seen is we're now at that kind of crossover point, if you like, the tipping point, where the capex declines that we talked about before have been going at such a rate, combined with the knowledge that the system is changing. There are more renewables coming on. The volatility is going to increase. The pricing is going to increase. I think we're at that point, and essentially that's what has caused us to make the decision we have done. And remember what we're doing, we're building the case today, but the system doesn't come online until 2024, and the market will have changed already by that time. And we're already beginning to see events, on the wholesale and the BM, which of course aren't unusual. They've happened in the past, but I think we're going to start seeing them with more regularity, and it just attracts more interest from not just ourselves, but I think from other providers who are looking at that volatility and that spread going forward. So
would you, in making that revenue case to investors and putting in quite a lot of money, hundreds of millions, I guess, are you? Kathy's pointed out that most of the money at the moment is coming from ancillary services, some money perhaps from the capacity market, particularly if you've got an earlier one before derating contract. And then you're starting to look into the balancing mechanism. That's been quite limited so far, but beginning to more and more batteries coming into that. And then, so we're talking about kind of price arbitrage type models and wholesale market. And so, do you see that market shifting away from ancillary services? Is ancillary services going to be kind of full essentially by the time that you come along with your very large project by 2024? And does that mean you have to build a business case based on these on these other sort of larger value pools for the future, perhaps less, which presumably means less revenue per transaction, but potentially a larger pool?
Yeah, so I mean, it is focused on the merchant market. So the underlying principles are we will be running in the wholesale BM for the majority of our GM. The capacity market will still be there, and as Kathy pointed out, there are various deratings depending on the duration of storage that you're bringing online. And actually all that's gone towards our decision, which is to build a 2-hour system. Now, at a very base level, if you imagine a 1-hour system compared to a 2-hour system, well, in a 1-hour system, if you're premised on basically a merchant market type model, you're buying the cheapest 1 hour of the day and selling the most expensive. And then you move on to the next hour of the day if you're adding an extra hour of duration. to your capacity, then you're capturing the next most valuable price spread, but it's less than the first one by definition because you've already caught the first one. But simultaneous to that, when you start thinking about battery capex on a pound per megawatt hour basis rather than a pound per megawatt basis, it is less expensive to build those additional that additional energy storage. So there is an economy of scale in the energy, the duration, not just on the megawatts. And I think the other thing I would add is that's a very simplistic way of explaining how you get your value from a merchant model. In reality, you're not just buying 1 hour and selling this one and then buying the next one. There's a lot of stuff going on in between times. If the battery's sitting there doing nothing, then it's probably not the right thing. You should be forming a view as to where a lot of analytics, a lot of data analysis, and it's important that your execution strategy for whatever trading strategy you have is correct. And I think the other thing to add on the technology point is that what we're seeing now is the chemistries are more capable of performing a more energy arbitrage type model. So you don't necessarily need to manage that in the same way that you did before. You have to understand exactly what the cause and effect is. So you have to go in with your eyes open and realize, okay, if I'm doing a cycle or half a cycle, it's got this impact on the system. But as long as you have all that information, overall your performance, you're making the right decisions, the business case comes together.
Okay, good. Just pick up on one of the questions actually from Johnny from which was about an interesting question about, are there PPAs emerging now? David, are you selling direct to suppliers to help them hedge their risk and balance their portfolio, or are you visiting trading direct in the wholesale market and in the VM?
It's an very interesting question. So there are PPAs available in the market. Well, there are floors. People might write floors for you. Now that's not necessarily something that we will look at, but people are willing to do that. It's a question of value against benefit on that. I think as the market evolves, if we had the same conversation this time last year, you'd be talking about a very different set of circumstances. It's moving so quickly, and I think as more and more projects get online and more parties start actually getting these projects on the ground and operating them in the market, it will evolve yet further. So it's a really exciting stage, I think, of the implementation of batteries overall. I'm very positive about the technology, but I agree with all the comments that we made. The market now isn't going to be the market in 10 years' time, but you need to ensure that flexibility and that future proofing is considered and built in at the investment stage.
Okay, excellent. Kathy, I was going to come to you and ask about what batteries can't do. I don't know, you might want to make a quick comment on some of the other points, but what is it that they won't be able to do? And I might ask Marek that same question.
It's not a case of because things are evolving the whole time. Things that batteries, so if you think about the stuff like the Pathfinders, batteries are capable of doing that sort of thing, but we're at a very early stage in batteries being used for that. So this is examples of providing reactive fault current, that kind of stuff. And I remember sitting at a conference at Imperial College, even just 2 years ago, where someone from France, my old company EDF, was presenting on virtual synchronous machines and grid forming converters, and it was like whoosh, straight over my head. And now I sit talking about grid forming converters like I've known about them all my life. Now there is one big battery, for instance, in Australia that's been used in this way, and it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the Scottish Pathfinder. But you need the problem is you need extra money to do this, and you need a way of recovering your income. So for instance, if you want to provide reactive power out of your inverter or absorb it with a battery, Mark, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think you need a slightly bigger inverter. Now that shouldn't be a problem from the cost point of view, because the inverter is not the really expensive bit, but you need to be thinking ahead and trying to future-proof this stuff. And so in terms of what can't a battery do, it can even provide inertia if you have the right inverter on it. You know, it can do this, whether it's the cheapest way of doing it, whether it's the most sensible, reliable way of doing it. And for me, and so I am actually looking at other technologies. I'm looking at, you know, liquid air storage. I really want my own pump storage station again, because I used to love playing with First Hydro so much. So I'd like one for Christmas, but my boss won't buy me one. But that would be great. And I like it because it naturally has a synchronous machine on there, and it's a proven technology for providing inertia, reactive power, etc. So I like that. Compressed air storage is similar. So it's not about what it can or can't do, it's about what it's best in. And what I found, even in my pump storage days, was, you know, which market will it be in 10 years' time? Do you know what? I don't have a clue. But because each year I was there, we made pretty much the same gross margin each year, but in completely different ways. Sometimes we were mostly in wholesale, sometimes we were mostly in the BM. We were moving between multiple markets, and it's that optionality. And people keep talking about stacking revenues and thinking it's about building all the revenues and taking part in 6 markets at the same time. Well, then you're probably overselling your product. It's about moving between those markets optimally, I would say.
Okay, and just so that point on other technologies, then, Kathy, and let's just introduce at this point that kind of interseasonal question, the phrase that
that's a hard one.
The phrase that in Regen we sometimes talk about is the Dunkelflirt challenge. For those, I'm sure all of you are well aware of Dunkelflirt, but apparently we're reliably assured it's a German word meaning a kind of period of sort of cold, dank weather, no wind, and across, you know, you imagine that across Northern Europe, none of the wind's going. It's a few days, you know, that remains, doesn't it, a big challenge for the net zero transition, and it's not presumably going to be batteries. So we're starting to see BEIS talk a bit more about long-term storage and fund long-term storage developments. So, you know, are those other technologies you're thinking of are about into day?
No, so it depends. You can get a couple of days maybe, etc. I do think, so there's 2 regions. So if you look recently, late December, early January, so I wouldn't take the £4,000 SIP and stuff in balance prices, what prices are going to do in the future either, because the price shape that we're getting right now is a characteristic of the market, which is that these CCGTs have to recover their fixed costs. Grid have to bring them on long notice periods, etc., and the system was short. So I think the price shapes will be very different in a world with a lot of more flexible generation and renewables. But the problems we were having in the last 4 weeks was due to wind. So if you think about the variation in wind now, it's going between about, you're often getting 8, 9, 10 gigawatts, more than that on occasions, but then you start getting topped out in Scotland. On those days, you were getting 1 or 2 gigawatts of wind. If you think about a change from 10 gigawatts to 2 gigawatts, that's equivalent to 4 full coal-fired power stations in old money of a change that we have to manage on the system. That's a lot of capacity to begin with. And it happened for several days in a row. So if you've got stuff that, so if you think about a gas engine, it's got storage because it's got the energy stored in gas. So the question is, can we create biofuels that help in the meantime, for instance? Is it hydrogen? A lot of people are putting their hope on hydrogen. Some people have said, you know, how can we store the energy for the summer and bring it into the winter? And it is a real, and if I knew the answer to it, I probably wouldn't be telling anyone right now, because I think I could make a fortune if I knew what the answer is to it, but I haven't seen a really credible answer yet, apart from let's hope hydrogen can do it or something like that.
Okay.
Or we have lots of biomass with CCUS and things like that, or we're looking as well at other forms of low carbon generation that isn't renewable. So different forms of CCUS, they're going to have a place in the mix. But if you've got 40 gigs of wind, that's a heck of a variation you're going to have on the system. It's
Okay.
kind of exciting and scary at the same time.
Excellent. Let's go with exciting. Marek, we talked just the role of batteries. How far might they go? When are other technologies going to be required? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think I'd agree with sort of what Kathy said. If you ask the question as like what batteries can't do, it's a relatively short list. It's a question of economics predominantly. So I mean, you can build a 24-hour duration battery if you want. It just doesn't really make much commercial sense to do that. So the tipping point, as I said, we've seen it differently in different markets, and about 6 to 8 hour duration is the furthest that we've got to with commercial battery energy storage projects anywhere in the world today. Now, again, a little bit more runway there, but when you start to go beyond a sort of diurnal pattern of usage, where it's sort of day to night or peak to off peak, very sunny to nighttime, however you want to put it, then it's a different market and a different challenge. And actually, it is the big difficult question about how do you get to net zero, because most different studies that have looked at renewable penetration say that you can get to about 80% renewable over the year on average, which means many times of the year you're going to be at 100%, and so the average is already very high, but you can do that with daily storage, and so batteries can solve most of that issue. When you look beyond that, okay, batteries you can commercially build whatever duration you want. It just doesn't make commercial sense to do that, and that's where other technologies have to fit in. And it's not a straightforward answer. Hydrogen is often the sort of throwaway. That'll be the solution. I think it sort of remains to be seen, because the market hasn't set a remuneration mechanism that makes it worthwhile to build that sort of duration of storage yet. What is driving the 6 to 8 hours is maybe worth touching upon. So 6 hours is most commonly being used, 4, 5, 6 hours, let me say, in solar and storage context, both in the US, Latin America, places like that. So we're in Chile building the largest battery energy storage project in LATAM, which is 560 megawatt hours of capacity, 5-hour system. And that's basically there as a time mechanism. You've got storage that's there, solar that's there in the middle of the day, and you want it in the evening. So batteries can solve that sort of problem. The 8-hour duration examples, I believe, have been sort of like islanded interconnectors, where you're dealing with interconnector flows and again having to shift whether it is peak to off peak, day to night. The only thing that they don't economically is that really long duration. So I would say beyond 8 hours at the moment, it doesn't really make sense unless you're looking at 100% renewables, which we should do. There's a target to do that, but we've got longer to think about that particular problem.
Okay, excellent. So we've got let's just think a bit more then about the kind of the kind of technology, where the money is going to be coming from. I think we've got a bit of background noise from one of us. I don't know if it might be yours, Kathy, when you're on there. Yeah, but one of the kind of longer term visions that we see of the system, I sometimes call it the Goran vision, from Goran, the professor Strubovic at Imperial College, and we're seeing it coming up in the chat and the questions, is at the moment we're talking about big projects, and David's is obviously a kind of the exemplar of a very big projects, centralized on power stations, connected to TO maybe, or on the pretty big projects. 50 megs, pretty big on the distribution networks. But there's a world sort of vision where everything's embedded, so it's all decentralized. We've got 20 million batteries on wheels in our cars. Everyone's got a battery. Every commercial place got a battery. Everyone's got the flexibility, and price signals are coming down to end consumers to move demand around and use their battery and use the solar on their roof and the like. So is there, is that an either or? Do we see kind of the role of large scale storage and embedded storage, or is it going to be one going to be dominant? Are all these? Is there any chance that that David's very large project is going to become, kind of is going to end up as a, if you'll forgive me, David, a dinosaur outcompeted by the kind of mammals of the kind of decentralized market. Kathy, I just interested in your view of that.
I think you know that my answer to this one already, Merlin. I'm a bit of a both person, and I think we've been talking a lot about the problems on the transmission system. We haven't really gone into the distribution system at the minute and the issues with constraints and managing voltage there, and the fact that it's fundamentally changing as a system from one that transported power from the transmission system to people's homes to now being a very active network. So I personally see a place for electric vehicles, and I'm one of these people. I'm not one of these people who think that all of us at home are going to be really engaged with our energy. I got a Hive system, and for the first 3 weeks I was fascinated, and then I just wanted it to do what I wanted it to do and not really worry about it. So I think energy is a service, and people plugging in their electric cars, getting perhaps a fixed price like we do on our mobile phones for energy and all of that working, and that will have a role. But what's interesting as well is, because if you think about it, our personal cars are probably sitting idle for about 80% of the time. During lockdown, it's probably 95% of the time. So they're available to manage the system, but there's questions about how do you guarantee the batteries, the warranties, if they're cycling, etc. But it has a role. If the world changes and we go to much more, or in certain cities, people stop owning cars and they actually go for autonomous services where something comes and picks you up and drives you to somewhere. When you look at that kind of model for transport, they're probably on the road 80–90% of the time and aren't available for services. So I think, of course, whole system thinking is really important and understanding what might happen. And we don't know. And the problem is you can't decide which of those worlds is going to happen, and you have to prepare for both of them. So I think there's always going to be a role for centralized generation, and there's going to be a role for decentralized generation. And I'm not a big fan of balancing everything in a region perfectly and then having the national grid, because just from an economics perspective, it's a make or buy decision in every region. If the next generator in your region costs £1,000 a megawatt hour and you can buy it somewhere else at £30 a megawatt hour, you're going to ship it into your region. So for me, it's about the most efficient thing at all times. So I'm a bit of both.
Okay, that's that's helpful. It's interesting to hear these kind of practical realities. I was on one of the first calls that we had with the new energy minister the other day, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, and there was quite a strong lobby from various people. You probably could guess that as kind of saying that, this is what you really need to do, Minister. You need to open up half-hourly metering. You need to, we need to kind of get flexible, smart. We need to get customers active. And then I think it was actually her that came back and said, well, we haven't seen much evidence of that so far. And, if I've just paid 70 grand for my Tesla, am I really going to care that whether I pay £1 or £5 or 20 quid for my, charging it up, do I just want it done? So that debate is still, it's interesting, kind of running. David, just big versus little, you guys have gone big, any chance that everyone will just use their batteries in their cars instead and outcompete you?
So basically I fully agree with Kathy's summary there. The space for all of us, without sounding too strange with that, I don't want to be too boring with that. I find it harder to. I also agree with what she said in terms of the electric vehicle. I think that's a harder image to imagine, or at least it will take longer for folk to be accepting of that, and may take developments in further developments in the electric vehicle, batteries, which of course has driven the downward cost across the market overall. So we Intergen have benefited from that, but I'm not convinced it will be joined up at the with your Tesla sitting in the driveway for the reasons that you've mentioned. But in terms of embedded or distribution sites against transmission, it happens to be the case now that the last 18 months or so have been quite fortuitous for our sites and for transmission in general because of changes that happened in the market, which we would characterize as leveling the playing field. I'm sure others will have other views on it, but overall, it's certainly allowed our projects to fly. But I wouldn't say that's necessarily in the medium term to the detriment of the right projects at the right price with the right infrastructure at distribution level as well. So there is space, I think, for both, and we very much see that as the world going forward.
Okay, and Marek, we've got huge kind of TO, we've got distributed, I guess, if depending on our terminology we want to use, which is kind of, you know, on the distribution networks in the megawatt scales, and then we've got embedded, which is, you know, 50 or 100 kilowatts or whatever it is in your car, or, you know, a battery in your office or your light industrial site, except behind the meter, I suppose, is embedded behind the meter type terminology. Are we going to see a mix of all of those in your view, and indeed I'm saying batteries, but electricity storage technologies more generally, or do you think one big or little will win out?
So yeah, I think I'm mostly agreeing with the other panelists, and I've been following what's going on in the chat and agree that there's probably an element of both, but I'll share a sort of personal view of how I see these different markets, because it is largely market driven. It depends upon the specific regimes that drive, you know, one or the other. So in the UK, if you look back a couple of years, behind the meter was quite an interesting business case, but then the targeted charging review, the reforms there, the removal of triads, all sort of tanked the behind the meter business case. If other markets, we see that you know, still in place. So Canada, for instance, has quite an active behind the meter market. Germany in certain regions have particularly time of use based distribution charges, and there's a really strong incentive to you know, to basically manage that behind the meter. We quite deliberately sort of sit in the middle with a relatively what we call mass customizable building blocks. So the cubes that we have that are the hardware basis of the technology we install, you configure them to the specific use case that you have, and whether that's a, you know, massive, you know, giga battery project with many, you know, hundreds and thousands of these, you know, cubes and inverters for long duration, or it's 2 or 3 cubes behind the meter, it's the same fundamental building block. So the real issue here is actually around scalability of the technology, because if you have to come up with a different custom solution for every single use case and project, you won't be able to get scale. So we deliberately sort of taken the route where we can pivot to either market, depending on local conditions, basically what is required. I guess the final point is just, where does that threshold end? So I think, you know, both the giga batteries, the really big sort of displacement of power plant scale projects, there's no reason you can't build a 1,000 megawatt battery, a nuclear power station sized project. Does it make sense for you to do that? I would say it depends. One thing we haven't really touched upon in the discussion yet, largely because it's predominantly prohibited in the UK, is using batteries as transmission infrastructure. So as replacement N-1 contingency, basically. We have power lines that carry a gigawatt of power, and they have the capacity to carry more, but they're not because of redundancy. Now, if you put in a battery to do that redundancy, you can carry twice the power flow. Very useful, because it's much easier to do that than building a whole new power line and you know, upsetting everyone going through planning reviews for 10 years. So that very large has a place. So does the, you know, long duration and capacity. Kathy's perfectly right as well with the distribution level stuff and solving things on a local level. The only place that I would say it won't have a significant impact, and this is just a personal view, is that sort of EV and residential storage space. The economics there don't stack up, I believe. Like, people who do them for other reasons than the return on investment, and it's hard to see that changing. The EV point Kathy raised, yeah, there's 3 bits. Everyone thinks about the fossil fuel cars turning to batteries, but the other 2 points that she raised are very, very much relevant. Autonomous vehicles and Uberification of transport, like, you know, driving around on their own. You won't have them sat there plugged in very much to do other things. So that last one's a personal view, but that's why I sort of don't feel threatened by the EV sort of behind the meter case.
Okay, yeah, it's fascinating. We've looked at V to G at some detail at Regen and concluded it's certainly a way off if it is, become V to B, back to the building, might be more relevant. Okay, I'm conscious we're coming towards the end of our session, so I'd like to come around and ask for a sort of final comment, particularly and focus perhaps in about kind of policy and regulation, and what you would like to see. We've got an energy white paper. We've got the government is reviewing a system. Kathy's old shop is up for review in terms of what it does and who owns it and where it sits. We've got kind of how we can support renewables in the future, and we've got a new version of the smart systems and flexibility plan due out. That's before I come to you. That's the opportunity for my ESN membership plug. If you would like to have conversations like this on a more regular basis and sit in groups of the experts and discuss the market and what are the key issues and what are the key challenges, and have that interaction with oh look, there's a nice slide that Hannah, our producer, has brought up for us there, showing all the great companies that are members. And so the kind of on a serious note, these are the conversations we have to. This is complicated stuff. I've worked intensively with policymakers and ministers, and they very much, of course, want to do the right thing, but they're not experts in this space. If we do, as a sector, storage want to have an impact, want to get the kind of right structures and markets, then we're going to have to front up and engage in that process and have the dialogue with the ESO, with Ofgem, with BEIS, and we need to do that we need to do that collectively, individually as well, but we definitely need to do it collectively. So the ESN's had some great success with the increase of the planning, threshold to larger staff, as to the writing the definition of electricity storage that's going into primary legislation. And we should probably thank Anthony, one of the founders, or the founder of the ESN in this point, and congratulate him on his OBE as well in this year's honours. Obviously, someone out there recognises a big contribution to storage, and so that those we need to have that impact. So I'd encourage all of you to get engaged and put your shoulder to the wheel. So having given my plug there, let's come to David first then, in terms of the what you would like to see coming out of public policy from ministers, whether that's a kind of you've got your elevator ride with Anne-Marie Trevelyan, the minister, you've got your 30 seconds pitch, whether it's a fairly technical detail, or whether it's a kind of bigger picture vision.
I mean, I think there's a couple of things that will always come out, and I think it's important to emphasize them again. I mean, we believe in markets, and we believe that the solution should be found through as much as you can do that mechanism. You need transparency, and you need certainty for the longer term, especially when people are investing in long-term projects. I mean, we're now talking 20-25 year projects as typically the case. But I also, going back to the certainty point, it should be evolution, not revolution. I don't think there should be anything radical. There's a lot of things going well. You touched on some of those. But I think the one missing piece would be something along the lines of a CFD, or some sort of support for low carbon flexibility, because I think to some extent that's the missing, the missing link. Otherwise, we may just see more waves of, diesel recips and such like coming on. Okay, so something about the low carbon space. That's such an area we've got various sessions coming up on, and we've done quite a lot of thinking about is how do we start to say we need flex, but we need low carbon flex if we're going to have a zero carbon system. Marek, you've been involved in this space for a long time, and ESN for a very long time. What's your kind of current wish list?
Okay, I'll keep the wish list short. So the first one would be it's very helpful. We have a net zero target and a 2030 target overall around decarbonisation, but a storage specific one, wherever we've seen that elsewhere in the world, has been a massive booster. I know something ESN has asked for many years and we've never got. And so a storage target explicitly would be extremely helpful. And then the second would be, much as it's great to have a storage definition, a separate asset class for storage is really important as well. It's not generation, and being a subset of generation is prohibiting a number of the really useful things that energy storage can do to help transform the way we power the grid.
Excellent. Okay, that's short to the point. Thank you very much, Marek. As you said, we had various meetings with BEIS pushing for a target, and if you look at the energy white paper, they've done some more transparent modelling now, and you can start to pull up. Said it's a target. You can at least start to kind of see sort of their sort of base case and how much storage is in it. But so that there's a little bit more perhaps coming out of that. Kathy, finally, thank you for your support for ESN back in your days at ESO and since joining us as SEMCORP. But yeah, given that background, probably good to give you the last word on what you would like to see coming out of public policy.
Well, first of all, can I ask that we don't have a specific target for storage? It's a target for flex, perhaps, because I'm technology agnostic at all times, even though I've now left National Grid. So I do believe in targets for flex, but it can be provided in other ways, and low carbon flex, I agree. So I would tweak Marek's request, if that was okay. I think the main point that I would make that sometimes gets lost is flex is as important for decarbonisation as renewables. And as you know, I'm a big believer in markets, but short-term markets where you've got that depth and where you don't need new technologies. I think what Grid have been doing on the Pathfinders is fantastic. And I have to say it had nothing to do with me. So I would like to explore as well how you can bring on longer term storage. Does it need some sort of cap and floor mechanism or something like that, similar to interconnectors, which we use to provide flex to our system? So that would be my second ask. And then I just want to throw something in the end where the energy storage network, and something Marek said was very interesting. He doesn't believe in batteries at home. The key thing we have not talked about at all is heat storage in all of this. And that could be a really important vector for sorting out some of the problems, particularly in the domestic side of things. So think about heat as well as electricity would be my final one.
Excellent. Okay, well, look, we've kept over 140 participants on Zoom, and I think another 200 joining by Hoover. It's all too complicated for me these days. And we've seemed to have kept them on for an hour and a half. So that's testament to our speakers, and we have a fascinating area, a real milestone of 1 gigawatt battery storage, new technologies, new challenges, rapidly developing markets, some really gritty technical issues, and we've really got into some great detail of some of that and some really interesting issues today. Over the next 2 days, so today, tomorrow, and Thursday, we have a whole number of further sessions. So some of the things we're hearing from BEIS about flex markets, we have DNOs on, some of the points Kathy was making. I think we're later talking about kind of how to drive low carbon into flex markets, talking about smart solutions and innovation. So that's all coming up, so you can book for that. It's all free, and that's all free thanks to the wonderful support of our sponsors. So thank you very much to Fluence, to Roadnight Taylor, and all the for everyone who's participated. It's been we've had support from Schneider as well, and from Swan Barton. So they're the people who are kind of making it possible for us to do this, to run these sessions free, and to really try and bring as many people engaged and involved into this area, and bring new people into this area, which, as Kathy said, is absolutely critical for our zero carbon journey. We need to be able to run, we talked about this, it's been often talked about as the most important decade in human history in terms of the climate crisis, and we know that we can do a lot of renewables, we know we can build electric vehicles. Slightly big question if we know if we have solutions for heat, but for all of those things we're going to need a lot of renewable power, and for that we're going to need a lot of flexibility and a lot of storage. And so if we can encourage more people to be engaged in this and participate, then that's fantastic. So do urge you to participate in the networking session that comes directly after this. You can go straight into that on the Hoover platform, and to many of the other sessions that are coming up over the next few days. And I think after that, it really only remains for me to thank our panelists for their participating and giving of their time, and to thank all of you at home for participating. I hope you've haven't been too distracted by the postman and the dog and the homeschooling, and that you've been able to participate and in some of this. I've managed to have a free no knocks on the door and no dog barking for an hour and a half, so that's been pretty remarkable. So thank you all for participating. Normally, as at the end of these sessions, I'm wishing people a safe journey home, but maybe it's just wish you all a nice journey to your kitchen to enjoy a nice cup of tea. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Merlin.